Chairman, obviously this is a huge problem. Coming from a manufacturing background, I've solved a lot of problems. It starts with acknowledging reality, even when you really don't like looking at it, and then setting achievable goals. So I'd like to just I know the Chairman kind of started out with a little bit of history, but I'd like to do a quick timeline because it kind of lays out the history of this thing, because I've been hearing, certainly since I joined this committee, from this administration, we need to find a political solution. And I'm wondering if that's really a realistic goal. But, you know, the Arab Spring began in Tunisia in 2010. 2011, you know, Bashar Assad started slaughtering his citizens. There are hundreds slaughtered when President Obama declared that Assad should step aside, like he decided that Mubarak must go and Gaddafi must go, without any plan to figure out, well, what happens when they go. By 2012, Assad had slaughtered somewhere between 8,000 to 37,000 of his citizens, and President Obama in August of 2012 drew a red line on the use of chemical weapons. By 2013, there had been 100,000 Syrians slaughtered, and of course, Bashar Assad crossed that red line, and we did nothing. By 2014, there were more than 200,000 Syrians slaughtered. 2015, we're definitely above that, and now we've got 7.6 million Syrians displaced within Syria, 4 million refugees, and we're starting to see hundreds of thousands flow into Europe. I want to talk a little bit about Iran's role in the Middle East. Anybody dispute that Iran was one of the greatest destabilizing factors in Iraq, I mean? So, I mean, we definitely won the Iraq War, and then we lost it, largely because Iran destabilized it, correct? Backing the Shiite militias. Obviously, Iran is one of the greatest supporters of the Assad regime in Syria, as we've seen that spin out of control. I failed to mention 2011, kind of a key date there. President Obama made the historic blunder of pulling a stabilizing force out of Iraq, which I think would have stabilized and seized on historic opportunity to see a Sunni, Shia, and Kurd coalition potentially succeed, and I think also would have helped stop Iran supply overflights into Syria. But Iran is destabilizing Yemen, Lebanon through Hezbollah, Gaza through Hamas. Are we seeing a common destabilizing factor there? And now, to complete the history lesson, we just completed this deal with Iran where literally the world is going to allow tens of billions, eventually hundreds of billions of dollars to flow into the Iranian economy and the military to strengthen that destabilizing state sponsor of terror. Is there really a political solution that's going to be possible in Syria? I'll start with you, Dr. Kagan.
I am extremely concerned about the prospect of a political solution in Syria because there are many parties to the conflict who do not wish to see a political solution that we, the United States, would define as acceptable. Bashar al-Assad is one, of course, since perpetuation of his power and his regime is certainly one of his goals. And I assess that his presence at the head of that regime is a driver of radicalization through the region. A second actor that does not wish to see a political solution is Jabhat al-Nusra, the al-Qaeda affiliate inside of Syria. And because Jabhat al-Nusra is intertwined with Syrian opposition fighters in combined headquarters and provides high-end military capabilities to those opposition forces, it is a credible spokesperson to those forces. They listen to Jabhat al-Nusra because they have military capability that is wanted. They are actively opposing a political solution. So in short, although I would like to see one, I do not actually think that the behavior of different groups on the ground is simply going to change in order to enable political transition. Rather, I do actually think that sometimes diplomacy needs to be backed by force.
Now, talking about the denial of reality, you know, I know I've listened to this administration talk about how, for example, in Ukraine, we need to offer Vladimir Putin an off-ramp. I don't know about you, but all I see Vladimir Putin looking for is biding his time, looking for on-ramps. I'm afraid we're going to start hearing that pretty quick. His involvement in Syria, oh, we got to offer him an off-ramp. No, he's looking for an on-ramp. And again, why do we talk about a political solution when, let's face it, we're not going to have a political solution until there's a military victory? Isn't that basically true?
I believe that without security, human beings do not turn to political solutions.
Mr. Katulis, do you believe, President Obama has stated his goal, degrade and ultimately defeat ISIS. Are we making any progress toward that goal at all? I mean, do you see any kind of strategy for defeating ISIS out of this administration?
I think there's excuse me, Mr. Senator, there's a strategy on paper, but the implementation of that strategy has been lacking in certain aspects. I think in Iraq, there's actually been some decent progress on using our leverage to try to get the central government to be more inclusive, a different face, a different approach there. The integration of these military and diplomatic tools has been quite good. The picture in Iraq still is tough, but it has arrested the rise of ISIS last year and has beat it back in some cases, and there's a lot to work with. In Syria, the gap between the stated administration policies, its goals, this goal of a political solution and the tactics we have in place is very wide. In the short run, I actually don't see a prospect for a political solution inside of Syria at this point. But if some of these tools that some of the senators have talked about, the discussion about a no-fly zone or a safe zone, if all of these different pieces, which I essentially see as tactics, are wrapped up in a strategy that tries to get to some sort of cessation of hostilities, some sort of sense of battle lines, which I think if you see from ISW's maps, in Iraq, you more or less have a general sense of the contours, and there's a little bit of predictability there. In Syria, that's not the case. A political solution is much more viable if we actually see a decline in violence, something Mr. Bowers has highlighted too for the refugee crisis. So today, no, I don't see it. But we do need to actually think about how do we use these military tools, because if the U.S. starts using military tools with the great power that we have without thinking through how this will likely impact a fragmented conflict in Syria, we could actually accelerate the fragmentation of that state without thinking through what are the next steps.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.